Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. We have another emergency video this evening with two big updates coming out over just the last couple of hours. The New York Subliners confirming their full roster for the new season, with Sib officially confirmed. A very interesting reaction, it's got to be said, from the players and coaching staff to this one after the controversial dropping of Priestahh just a few weeks ago now. But also the Seattle Surge, a brand new roster rumour emerging over the last couple of hours. Some interesting reactions, and I've got to say this is a rather interesting team, and there will be much more to come on this topic. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd really appreciate it. First of all, got to mention again, because I mentioned this, well, I looked at this briefly earlier today just to look at some of the rosters that we don't yet know and now actually have more of an idea of just a couple of hours later. But I thought this was actually more interesting even than that. Just looking at how these teams have done over the last couple of years. Not just in terms of CDL records, but also in terms of results, right? And you can see why Drazah made the decision he did when you see FaZe having 7 third places, 11. I mean, it's pretty tragic, you gotta lie. If you're a FaZe fan, I know you've won 7 things and nobody else has won more than 5 in the Subliners case, but 11 runner-ups is, like, it does detract from their, like, they're not really, I don't know what you guys think about the dynasty conversation nowadays, because I don't think we're ever really going to have a dynasty again like we did with OpTic and Complexity were absolutely ridiculously dominant before then. Maybe in the future it's more like there's eras of teams, and FaZe kind of had an era, but they did get a lot of second places. There's only 3 teams on here that have won a ring. Of course, Dallas Empire not featuring here. They won at the initial one. And then as we get further down, it's kind of impressive to see that 9 of the 12 teams have won something at some point. Florida actually won quite a lot during MW19. We've had Gorillas even somehow, Rocker, Surge. All these teams have won something. Boston have got a 3rd place. Even London with a couple of 3rd places and a 2nd. Largely, and Paris are carried by this as well, right? They're 1 2nd place. And I'm guessing their 1 top 3 as well was back in the Modern Warfare 19 season when there was like those online home series, and Paris made the finals in one of them, so fair play, they at least get on the board, but it's not great, is it? But they do have more series wins than Gorillas have, and Boston, but Boston have only been here for a couple of years, so got to give them a little bit more time to seem a little bit more representative, I suppose. Couple of roster things as well. Beans, formerly of Boston, now he's no longer, well, he's kind of maybe on Boston still. They released pretty much everyone else but Beans, so he might still be there on the substitute position maybe for next season, which is interesting for sure. I do wonder whether if London decide to go down the UK route again, they might look at, because Nasty is easily good enough to be on a team better than London as far as I'm concerned, but if he is stuck on London again, Beans could be an interesting AR partnership for him to have, because I think he was really good, Beans, on the, well, I thought Beans was pretty solid last year. Nasty was really good at the flex position, and Beans, aggressive AR. I think he's got more to come, personally. I think he's somewhat underrated, actually, the season he had, so maybe that's a partnership that London should at least look at. There's the likes of Wardy as well they could look at going for, so there's some options there for London, but they've made some questionable rosters, it's got to be said, over the last couple of years. And finally, we're starting to see CDL teams this season come out with more questionable teams, because I've got to say, this season so far, a lot of the Rostermania stuff that we've seen has actually been relatively well thought out. The top 4 teams, I think, have made relatively, at least acceptable decisions. Most of the top 4 teams have made very good decisions, I think. New York, I'm not so convinced on, we'll discuss that in a second. And the other teams, the Bostons, the Thieves, the, you know, let's say the, well, Minnesota Rocker, right? The teams that have been rumored around them, I don't hate them. I'm not like in love with any of those teams necessarily. I think that they could have done 1 or 2 things differently, but I think they've done a solid job, most of those teams. But we're going to get to the Seattle Surge in a second, and that's where things might change tack a little bit. Touch and Clay, more interactions on Twitter. So either they're both going to just retire or something, or they're going to both go to Vegas, or like they're going to go to Gorillas, which is maybe the most likely. Before we get into Surge though, we've got to mention the New York Subliners, because the CDL confirmed this themselves the other day. They did, well, they put on their own website the contract database thing that Sib had signed with New York back on June the 14th, or July the 14th, sorry. June the 14th to be impressive given the fact that Chumps wasn't even over at that point. But yeah, we knew it was happening, and now it's officially confirmed. All the drama though around the Subliners has been with regard to Priestahh and the dropping of him, let's be honest. I thought it was wild how they, well, it's wild how this whole period went, to be honest, with the Subliners getting rid of a player that just won the World Championship with them, the contract stuff that was talked about. Then Priestahh said that he felt kind of backstabbed by his teammates. He said the organization would have been able to figure out the contract thing, so now the rumor is, did they just say, oh, we're going to drop your salary to try and force him out because the teammates wanted to get rid of him, and, you know, that was kind of just like a play, we don't really know, and Priestahh hasn't been, he said his perspective, we don't know the perspective of the organization, and we got these very interesting tweets at the time from the likes of Skyz, love you bro and all this stuff, and now we fast forward to the present day, where the Subliners officially announced things. I thought this was really cool, actually. They printed off all the Lion Man cards, Sender was looking through them to try and figure out who to get, and, I thought that was a nice touch. I've got to say, this announcement is, at least they gave it a go. It's pretty well done. I know people were roasting them for this, and it was a bit too cringe for me, I'll be honest, right? When they get the line up here, they've got them all singing, it was a little bit much for me, I'm not gonna lie, but in the end, on the right-hand side, Simp comes in, does his rendition, and they sign him to the roster. So well done. At least, everyone knew it's happening, so New York Subliners, their social team, they give it a go. And I do respect that. As I say, for my personal taste, a little bit cringe, but whatever. Good stuff. At least it's better than just a tweet and a graphic as far as I'm concerned. And Sib officially joined the New York Subliners. So it's now official. And I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of questions about this, right? Whenever you win the World Championship and less than a couple of months later, you've got a brand new team, it's really strange. And as far as I'm concerned, there's got to be some really good justification for this. Maybe we'll get some from the Subliners. They might do some content around this, exactly why they made these decisions. But I need some good justification. If you're going to win champs and make a change, now I know that historically teams that win champs very rarely do anything afterwards. It was only Thieves just this year that broke the champs curse of actually finally winning an event with the same team they won champs with the previous season. That's never happened before, and it might not happen again for quite some time, especially because Subliners, they're not the same team anymore. They've almost preempted the champs curse by just blowing it up immediately. We believe more than likely that they were looking at changes earlier on in the season when they were kind of struggling, and therefore they thought, you know what, maybe Sib for Priestahh is an option. The season ends and they think, well, we could still do it. And that's kind of what Daryl gets across here in a second. As Sender says, incredibly excited to work with Sib heading into MW3. Words can't explain how motivated we are to be even better next year. And I think they'll need to be, right? They were great this last season, right? At the end of the year, stellar team and the best in the world. They won champs emphatically in the finals against the Toronto Ultra. But all those other teams, I think, are getting better. So Subliners might have to do the same, and that might be why they've decided to make this call. As Kismet says, excited to move forward with Sib. Another season for myself to prove the biggest point to hold myself to, which is bringing the best out of my teammates. And that's one of the other key points that people have made about this, is that is Sib culturally? Now, I know that Daryl says, oh, culture, it's this buzzword, but as a few of you guys are mentioning in the comments, it was kind of started by Sender, because at Champs ended, he went on the couch with Scump or whatever, right, on their watch party, and he was talking about the culture of their team being the best, and now everyone talks about culture in the context of Call of Duty Esports, and now it's like, oh, it's a buzzword all of a sudden. But still, is Sib, from a teammate chemistry perspective, going to work as well as Priestahh did? I know that I think Dashy even mentioned this as a point on one of the, I think it was the OpTic, whatever they call it, game chats between the players, and he was somewhat unsure that Sib, from a personality perspective, is going to mesh with those guys as well as Priestahh did. As a ceiling of a player, he's got a higher ceiling, I think, but Priestahh had a solid 1.02 this past season, and that was kind of what you need from Priestahh in that setting. Sib can give you more in terms of a KD standpoint, no doubt about it. You know, he's only won one event in his career. Priestahh has done a lot more than that, way more experience, and just a newly minted world champion, let's not forget. So Sib's got the higher upside, I think, in terms of slaying power, and I would expect that potentially the ceiling of this team now goes up as a result, but I do think the floor goes down somewhat, and I would expect this team to be somewhat more inconsistent going forwards compared to what we saw with Priestahh previously. But then again, Priestahh was himself an inconsistent slayer. Like, yeah, that map we had 3 kills, didn't he? He rebounded well, and Sib was great at last season and was great at the start of this season, but nonetheless has not been so impressive in the latter half of this season. So I think of all the roster changes the top 4 teams have done, this to me is the most questionable. And look, I like the idea that they're trying to get even better, right? They're not satisfied with where they are, they want to improve even further, but you're going to have to give me some good reasons for this. Daryl gives his reason and says, excited to welcome Sib to the family. Sky is the limit for this kid. Looking forward to creating something special together. You see a special talent like that, you go for it. So, you know, maybe the same idea with HyDra, Pred, Sib. These guys have been, you know, hyped up big time the last few years. You see a guy like Sib, if you can get the deal done, you get the deal done. And that's what Daryl thinks. And sure, that makes sense. And bringing more talent onto the team is maybe going to work in their favor. But it's no doubt a really interesting storyline to keep an eye on. Now, speaking of the Seattle Surge then, we've got to mention this roster leak that's just arrived. Tomorrow, we'll talk about this in more detail because there's going to be lots of reaction to this on mainly the negative side. Seattle Seattle have primarily built terrible rosters in the CDL so far. Year 1 was a disaster. Year 2 was arguably even more of a disaster, given that they should have learned their lesson, but they didn't. Year 3, Novus comes in. They build an actual good team. Pred, Sib, Accuracy, Mac. They win an event. They're competitive most of the season. They had their ups and downs for sure. Questionable to keep that around, I think, for another whole year. Questionable decisions regarding Pred, not selling him to OpTic and all this stuff, but you'd think they might have learned their lesson and turned a bit of a corner. And now they build this team. And as I said earlier, most of the teams that are being formed around the league, I've been surprised by how I actually kind of like a lot of these teams. That's not usually the case. Usually I don't like a lot of these teams, but finally we found one that I just can't imagine is going to be good, if this is what happens. So Rambo is coming in as their head coach, we believe, and this is the roster they're putting together. The Arcetes and Illy duo that we've talked about rumored for ages is back in business, baby. They're not on Gorillas, they're here on the Seattle Surge. Pairing up with Hook, for sure, right? And I'm going to be honest, I had no intel that Illy and Hook was going to go to Surge. Like, no one had told me that. I talked about it earlier today. It's just because it just makes sense, right? Rambo goes there. Like, it was just the thing that made the most sense for these things to happen. But I thought, well, if aBeZy they want, which the rumor was they do, then surely it's aBeZy, Illy as your ARs. But no, aBeZy is here as well, and Arcetes is here as well. So aBeZy is a main AR player. Like, let's not beat around the bush on that one. He's a main AR player, and he's coming into a team with 2 ARs and Hook on the SMG. I just don't understand. When teams try to do this, it just never seems to work. You know what I mean? Like Minnesota Rocker, they tried this a little bit before, right? And it just never really worked. You have to make changes at some point. And this is the discussion that's being had in the article by Jake Hale, of course, very reliable on this stuff. Things could change, it's sources, things could happen. But he reckons that sources say aBeZy is likely to start the year on an SMG. Now, he might be good enough to make that work, but that's not his primary role. He's better, I would say, for sure on the AR. That's what he's been doing for some time. That's his preferred role, and yet he's going to be forced to a sub with your Arcetes Illy AR combo, which doesn't scream firepower and slaying as far as I'm concerned. So I really I don't like it, personally. I really don't like it, and we'll discuss it in more detail tomorrow because there will be more reaction. Now, there is a chance that Illy goes onto the SMG, and I think that might be the way to go, to be honest. I think that Illy can run a sub with reasonable effectiveness. It maybe is not his ideal role, but he did it well enough during the, let's say, MW19 season, 2020 season, so I think that is the way that I'd be leaning. But yeah, I like Illy, Hook, and aBeZy. Sure, go for it. And I think that it's good to bet on that kind of young talent. And apparently Rambo pushed hard to sign aBeZy, despite interest from multiple other franchises. And well done. I think getting aBeZy is the right call. But when you're going to round out your team with Arcetes, and I rate Arcetes as a player, but like with these 3 guys, I just can't see how it's really going to work. So yeah, intrigued to your perspective of that in the comment section below. It's definitely a strange one to me, but at least finally I found a team here that's being formed that I'm like, what are they thinking? Because I was like, am I washed by not thinking these teams are bad, or are they actually good teams? But maybe you guys disagree on that in the comment section below. Very much intrigued to your perspective down there. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.